They had escaped one kind of hell, but what had they run into now? And could a stranger in the sun be the end of their nightmare, or the beginning of a darker one? The man didn't move at first. They'd just stood there in the morning sun, one hand resting on the handle of the water bucket, the other near his belt. His face was hidden by shadow, but his stance spoke loud enough. He was not afraid, and that somehow made Eva more afraid. Mira clutched her arm. Her lips parted like she wanted to speak, but nothing came out. Then the man walked forward, slow, calm. Heavy boots crunching dry grass. He stopped about 10 feet away. "You girls hurt." His voice was low, growly but not unkind. Eva sat up using both arms. "We just need water." She didn't mean to sound so desperate, but her throat was on fire and the words cracked like dry leaves. He nodded once. "I got some in the bucket. Not cold, but it'll." He stepped closer, crouched down, and placed the bucket between them. Mira reached for it first, shaking. She took one sip and then burst into tears. The man didn't stare. He just took a slow breath and stood back up. "You running from someone?" Eva didn't answer. "Western stories," Mira did. "3 men. They lied to us, said we'd have work. Then they tied you up." The man's jaw shifted just slightly. He looked toward the woods, then turned back to them. "You girls alone now?" "We think so." She barely got the words out when the sound of hoof beats slammed through the trees. A rider broke out from the line of brush. Dust kicked up around him as he pulled his horse hard to stop. The man on the horse looked wild, shirt unbuttoned, face flushed from rage or drink or both. The heat was choking. Eva could barely breathe through the gag they tied around her mouth. Her wrists were raw and bleeding. Arms pulled tight behind her back, and every bump in the wagon sent a shock of pain through her shoulders. The canvas roof above them trapped the late morning sun. Sweat soaked her dress, clung to her spine, mixed with dirt, blood, and fear. Next to her, Mira slumped against the wooden side. Her lips were split, her eyes glazed, and her chest rose only in short, shallow breaths. The 3 men riding ahead shouted back at them now and then. One laughed, saying that they'd reach the border by nightfall. Another bragged about how much they'd get for fresh stock like this. Eva wanted to scream, she wanted to run, but all she could do was sit there, wrists tied, ankles bound, waiting. They stopped beneath some trees when the heat peaked. One of the men, the youngest, maybe 30, jumped down and walked to the back of the wagon. His boots crunched the dry grass as he climbed up and grabbed Mira by the chin. "She's fading. We should make sure she's worth it before we cross." His hand reached for her dress. Eva's heart pounded. Her voice cracked from behind the gag, but she forced the words out dry and broken. "Wait, we're taking it off." The man turned startled. Her voice trembled, but she looked him in the eyes. "You don't have to hurt us. We'll do it. Just let us go after." There was silence. Then he laughed. "You think I want it? You're not for me. You're for the buyer." He jumped down and walked off, still laughing as he rejoined the others. That night, when the men passed around whiskey and roasted stolen meat, Eva didn't sleep. Neither did Mira. Eva twisted her wrist, slowly working the wire shard she had hidden in her sleeve. It was dull, barely sharp enough to tear cloth, but it was all she had. The ropes dug deeper into her skin. Blood ran down her arms. Her breath stayed quiet. Every sound could be her last. Hours passed, the men argued, then they fell into snoring. Drunken sleep. Finally, one wrist came free. Eva worked fast to the rest, then moved to Mira, cutting through the rope around her friend's hands with shaking fingers. By the time both were free, the fire had died low. Eva grabbed Mira's hand, and they slipped from the wagon into the dark. The brush scraped their legs, thorns tore what was left of their dresses, but they didn't stop. They ran through the trees, barefoot, bleeding, desperate. The pain didn't matter. The fear did. Branches whipped their arms and faces. Leaves rustled underfoot. Every noise felt like a gun cocking. They didn't speak. There was nothing left to say. When dawn finally came, they had crossed into dry flat land. The trees thinned out, giving way to open ground and tall, brittle grass. Their lungs burned. Their feet were torn open. They collapsed by a dying log. Gasping, the sun was already blazing, climbing fast. Insects buzzed around them. The air smelled of dust and heat. Eva lifted her head. A shape moved near the tree in ahead. A man tall, weathered, a rope over one shoulder. A wide hat shading his eyes. He carried a metal bucket that caught the light. Water. He stopped when he saw them. No words, no smile, just a long, unreadable stare. Cowboy love stories. Was he a rancher, a traveler, or another monster hiding behind calm eyes? Yuri listening from. And if you were out there on that porch with Thomas, what would you have done differently? He saw the two girls, then his eyes locked onto the man with the bucket. You got something off mine? The cowboy didn't flinch. Don't reckon I do. The rider swung down, pulling a revolver from his belt. Back off. Those two belong to me. The words hit like a slap. Mira gasped. Eva reached for a rock. The cowboy moved faster. In one smooth motion, he stepped forward, pulled a pistol from his hip and fired. The shot echoed across the Wild West Stories podcast plane. The rider dropped his gun and screamed, falling to one knee. Blood soaked his shoulder. The cowboy walked up to him slow and steady. No one owns anybody out here. He picked up the drop gun, emptied it, and tossed it aside. You tell your friends. If they come for these girls, they answer to me. The man did argue. He crawled back to his horse. One hand pressed to his bleeding arm. The cowboy turned back to Eva and Mira. His voice was quieter now. Name's Thomas. My ranch is not far. You can rest there. Decide your next move in daylight. Eva and Mira looked at each other. They were strangers to him, but he had just risked his life. They followed him, but neither of them knew yet that this man had demons of his own. And some wounds didn't he bleed? They wait in silence. So who exactly was Thomas Granger? And what had he lost before finding them? Thomas's ranch sat at the edge of a dusty ridge. Not big, not fancy, just a stretch of land, one wooden house, and a windmill that creaked like it hadn't been oiled in years. But to Eva and Mira, it looked like heaven. He led them inside without a word. The walls were rough pine. The air smelled of leather, sun, and dry earth. No one's been in here but me for a while, Hezade, setting down his rifle. Make yourselves at home, whatever that means to you right now. He handed them 2 clean shirts from a peg near the door, old soft cotton, his own. They'll be big on you, but they're clean. Eva held the shirt like it was gold. Mira disappeared into the next room to change. And when they stepped out, both were swimming in fabric, but they smiled just a little. For the first time since the wagon, Thomas poured water into a tin cup and passed it to them one by one. Then Hezade down at the table, arms crossed. You girls got names? Eva, she said, voice Wild West romance movie still hoarse. This is Mira. He nodded slowly. Thomas Granger. Folks used to call me Granger, but most folks don't come around anymore. He didn't press for details. Didn't ask what those men wanted or how far the girls had run. He just got up and started cutting dried meat into slices. You're safe here, Hezade. Until you decide what comes next later. They sat on the porch watching the sun drop behind the hills. Mira had her legs tucked under her. Eva wrapped both arms around her borrowed shirt. Thomas lit a cigarette and said nothing for a long while. Used to have a wife, he said finally. She didn't much like ranch life. Said the silence was too loud. Eva looked at him, curious. She left. He shook his head. No, she got sick. Took the baby with her. That was 10 years ago. Nobody spoke after that. Only the sound of crickets. Inside, Thomas laid out blankets for them in the spare room. Door locks from the inside, he said, setting a small wooden wedge by the frame. If that makes you sleep better. Eva wanted to say thank you. But the words didn't come easy, so she just nodded out on the porch again. Thomas leaned back and looked at the stars. 2 girls had come into his life out of nowhere, and somehow his house didn't feel so quiet anymore. But just as peace settled in, trouble was already on the way. 3 shadows were riding through the dark, and one of them had a bandage in his shoulder. If you're still here with us, maybe you're like me. You appreciate a story that's raw, real, and just a little bit wild. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. Pour yourself a cup of tea and tell me what time is it where you are, and where in the world are you listening from? The sun had barely cracked over the horizon when Thomas stepped out onto the porch. The air was warm already. Dust hung low over the fields. He sipped his coffee insolence, boots propped on the rail, shotgun leaning against the wall beside him. Something in his gut felt off inside. Eva and Mira were still asleep. They had settled in fast. Too fast, maybe. Like folks who were too tired to be cautious anymore. He didn't blame them, but the unease in his chest wouldn't he quit. Then he saw it. 3 riders, slow, steady, coming in from the south trail. Thomas stood up, his jaw tightened. One of them rode stiff in the saddle, favoring his left side, the shoulder. It was the man he shot, and he brought friends. He turned and stepped inside. Girls, you need to get up. Now Eva blinked awake, saw his face, and didn't ask questions. Neither did Mira. They moved fast. Within minutes, they were outside. Thomas handed them each a small revolver from a locked chest. Ever fired one of these? Mira shook her head. Eva gave a small nod. Good. Stay behind the porch rail. Do not shoot unless I go first. The riders came up slow, real confident. The injured one spat in the dirt when he saw Thomas. You got something belongs to us. Thomas didn't smile. Funny. That's what the other fella said. The tallest rider dismounted, brushed the dust off his vest. We don't want trouble. Just want what's ours. Hand over the girls. We'll ride off quiet. Thomas stepped forward, one hand resting easy near his belt. You boys are outnumbered and out of your league. That was when things went sideways. The injured man drew first. Thomas ducked and fired. One shot hit the rider's leg, the other 2 dove for cover. Mira screamed. Eva raised her gun, hands shaking. It was chaos when the dust settled. One man laid groaning in the dirt. The others had their hands up. Thomas stared them down. You're lucky I ain't the hanging type. He stepped inside, came back with a pouch, dropped it on the ground. Here, gold. More than they're worth. Now get off my land and never come back. The men scrambled up, took the money, and limped off like beaten dogs, but they didn't look back. Eva stood in the doorway, breath caught in her chest. You paid them. Thomas nodded once. I don't like blood on my porch. This way it's done. Mira looked at him different after that. So did Eva, but neither of them knew yet. That peace was only the beginning, because what started a survival was starting to feel like something else. And when 3 people start carrying a little too much under one roof, well, you'll want to hear what happens next. The ranch felt different after that. Quieter. Not because it was empty, but because some battles leave behind a silence too big for words. Thomas went back to work like nothing had happened. He fixed the barn door, watered the horses, mended the fence, but the way he looked at Eva and Mira had shifted. And the way they looked at him, that had changed, too. Mira started waking early to help feed the chickens. Eva swept the porch every morning without being asked. They were no longer guests. They were part of something. One evening, as the sun dipped low, casting the land in gold, Thomas sat on the porch while the girls shelled peas beside him. No one said much, but something unspoken hung in the air. Not tension, not fear, something warmer, something like home. Mira broke the silence. You ever think we were meant to find this place? Thomas chuckled. I don't know about meant to, but I'm glad you did. Eva looked up at the sky. I lost everything. My home, my name, my future. She paused. But here, with you, with her. I feel like maybe I've got a shot at something again. Thomas nodded, then said the one thing none of them expected. Maybe we all do. It was not a love story in the way folks expect. That it was messier, older, built on bruises and bad luck and second chances. 3 people, each broken in their own way, each choosing to stay. And that's the thing about the Wild West. It doesn't care who you used to be and only who you decide to become. So maybe the real question is not how their story ended. Maybe the question is, if you had to start over from nothing, would you have the guts to fight for your own happy ending? Would you let love find you in the most unexpected place? And if you did, would you be brave enough to keep it? If this story stirred something in you, even just a little, tap that like button. And if you want to hear more stories like this, tales of grit, love, and the human spirit, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. We've got a lot more to tell. Now, pour yourself another cup of tea. Tell me where.